handful of values, I think Irving Fisher wrote his book Money and Interest in 1936, and he distinguished for the first time the difference between nominal interest rates and real interest rates. And the Federal Reserve during the Great Depression was focusing on nominal interest rates, which were really low. Long-term interest rate was around 3.6% in 1929. But the real interest rate, because there was significant deflation, was significantly high. It was around 13%. So they didn't make the distinction between the real interest rate and the nominal interest rate. Again, that's something we have learned, since, that we have to look at real values rather than nominal values.
Yeah, I mean, the incriminating piece of evidence in my favor is that the de facto Fed did price level and wholesale price index did a complete reversion back to the 1913 level. Consumer price index almost did the exact same thing. So you could qualify a conscious policy on the part of the Fed. The de facto case is astounding.
So the price level fell, and the money supply was restricted, no doubt about that. But it was restricted because they focused on the nominal interest rate rather than the real interest rate.
And they weren't focusing on M1 or M2 either. They were focusing on free reserves, that is to say, bank reserves minus borrowed reserves.
There was one more crucial thing they were focusing on. That was not raising the price of gold.
Yeah, that's true. That was the gold standard rule. that was what you were supposed to do under the classical gold standard.
All right, so this brings us back to present day. Didn't the U.S. government cause the 07-09 crisis by allowing congressional folks, particularly Dems, from allowing the Bush administration from reforming the, I thought I had this, the Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac debt. Well, reforming those. So, Clinton deregulated those agencies in 1997. Does it matter? Why?
I think there's a strong case to be made for that. There was an attempt by the Bush administration to rein in Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, and Barney Frank led the fight against that, and made some ridiculous statements about how, hey, there's no problem, this is great, we're extending homeownership to more people. There was this notion in government, in Congress in particular, that it was a good thing to jawbone the banks, to make mortgages that in normal circumstances they would not have paid to people who had no ability to sustain the payments. And then at the same time, the Federal Reserve was keeping interest rates low for an extended period past 9/11 that was flooding the banking system with easy money. So we had this circus of just throwing out all this cheap money, and a lot of it being funneled politically into mortgages that should never and would never have happened in a genuine free market.
But would you agree, though, that the government has a role in terms of trying to create more accountability and more transparency?
Sure. It would have a full-time job on its hands if it just made itself more accountable and more responsible.
I would disagree with that.
Well, we have to think it wasn't just Freddie and Fannie that caused the problems, because a lot of the loans that were made, especially some of the worst loans, didn't go through them. They weren't, so this is the problem too. It wasn't just that, when we talk about the banks were forced to lend, the banks weren't forced to lend to anybody. They chose to do it because they saw a chance to make profits from it. A lot of them didn't go through Freddie or Fannie. They were securitized through Wall Street, and some of the worst ones were generally there because people, hey, let's buy an asset. What asset is it? Backed by American real estate, AAA asset backed by American real estate, and we can buy insurance on it? Brilliant. And who knew that the market gets screwed? And this wasn't, it wasn't the market that was messing, it wasn't the government that was messing things up, it was the market that was mispricing these things.
And Fannie and Freddie were sitting and rating Bibles mortgages too. I mean, remember,
They were buying, but not necessarily the worst ones. They weren't buying it.
We know that from 2005 to 2007, 58% of the Fannie Mae mortgages were subprime and 62% of the Freddie Mac mortgages were subprime. But I don't think we can blame it on any one thing, right? I mean, it was a confluence of events. If it had been any one thing, we wouldn't have had where we are. What really happened was there was a series of events that caused the crisis. And I would argue, and this side is arguing, that most of those events were caused by the government and private sector responses to what the government is doing. I mean, if you reward excessive risk-taking, then you're going to get excessive risk-taking.
Also, the government rewarded excessive risk-taking.
Well, the government was rewarding excessive risk-taking by allowing the supply of credit to expand by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac securitizing these things. And then the government was when you keep interest rates that low, how do you make money? You know, ask Pete, you got to leverage, right? And the government's out there telling people that they need to leverage, and so people leverage.
You guys are talking about lowering the cost of production. One of the biggest costs of production is capital. And if you keep interest rates low, that fuels growth. That fueled growth in the 2000s. But the question is that there was reckless risk-taking, which was not done by the government or not encouraged by the government. It was done by the private sector because the private sector compensated persons who took high risk and high returns.
I mean, every tiny little thing, there was an amendment to the Income Tax Act that changed the way that employed the executive pay could be, which drove to a whole, drove people over to giving them options. I mean, there's all these sorts of tiny little things that added up to a big problem.
Let me just make a remark on the housing crisis. I mean, I think that the hope has always been in the United States, going back to Nixon, even prior administrations, that we have a problem with poverty. One of the best ways to cure this is to make these people property owners. If they become property owners, they become responsible, etc. And so in Detroit, we had the, back in 68, 69, and around it, we had the government stepping in. It was a Republican administration. They said, okay, we're going to allow welfare payments to be used to support mortgages. Well, the thing failed because what was happening is the people didn't have any character. Even though they were supposed to buy these houses, they were dismantling them at the same time. And I think there's been this, through both administrations, through both Republicans and Democrats, let's try to extend home ownership. That will create responsible citizens, whatever else. And I think they have the cart before the horse. You have character first and then ownership. If you have ownership without character, it will just deteriorate. And I think both administrations are responsible. I mean, you had every single administration. George Bush wanted to do it. Bill Clinton wanted to do it. Jimmy Carter wanted to do it. Richard Nixon wanted to do it. And I think the premise is wrong. You have to start with character first. And that means you have a down payment. Where you have to put a good down payment down, and you have some skin in the game. You're showing that you've been able to save, and that creates it.
I totally agree with that. That one of the policies which contributed to this is excessive focus on home ownership and allowing persons to buy homes when they could not actually afford them. I don't know whether it's character. I wouldn't put character as an issue, but they couldn't really clearly afford those homes, and they still bought them. And in fact, one of the reports said that President Bush, one of the only economic numbers he used to look at, in terms of his economic council, was this home ownership number, which was consistently going up during President Bush years. He was really proud of that number.
Harry, I can't believe you said that it's a good thing that the government injects money and credit and lowers the interest rate because that powers growth. If that were the case, I guess you would argue then for why not have the government create enough money to lower interest rates to zero and continue to do that forever.
But it's
And
not
as an economist, you surely believe in price. Look, the price of capital must reflect the supply and demand for capital, not the whims of politicians.
All right.
as
We
long as
have
the price of capital is low and inflation is low, we're in good shape.
all right. I was hoping for 2 more questions. I was unable to get it. If yours wasn't answered, we'll try and get these folks to answer the ones that were directed directly to them, and we'll put it up on the website.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Grand Valley State University. Visit us at gvsu.edu.